Before we continue with the analysis, I want to talk to you guys about JerseyFIFA.com, the home of all of the greatest football kits. Whether that's the latest home shirts, the latest away shirts, tracksuits, or even retro kits, Jersey FIFA has a bit of everything. There really is something for everyone, so if you are interested, then make sure to use the link in the description down below and head to JerseyFIFA.com. Good morning guys, welcome back to the AJ Analysis channel, where once again we have Premier League match coverage. This time Tottenham Hotspur's 1-0 win over Manchester City. Continuing basically Manchester City's inability to win at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, but also Manchester City's just weird spell they're going through. Of course, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Some of the tactics which weren't right from Pep Guardiola in my opinion, and of course, how Spurs so brilliantly nullified this Manchester City team. So, let's get into it. Basically, Spurs were set up in a 5-4-1 shape. We know that's how they like to defend when they don't have the ball, and City used a slightly different shape to what they normally would. So Spurs were in their normal structure. I think Pep Guardiola was expecting that, so tried to be clever and tried something a little bit different. And what we saw from City was a back two building possession with Ake and Akanji. We then saw Rodri and Rico Lewis building possession alongside each other, with Kyle Walker also in line. We then saw Bernardo Silva kind of playing in an attacking midfielder position, Alvarez and Haaland the front two, with Mahrez and Grealish providing the width. And this is probably for me the best way to describe this Manchester City shape is as a 2-3-1-4, but it also could be a 3-2-1-4 like this. This didn't work. To kind of cut to the chase, this Manchester City shape didn't work. Now, a lot of people, if you look at other videos, will probably tell you the same thing. Manchester City shape didn't work. I want to look at actually initially why I think Guardiola went for it, because I think that's important as well. Yes, we can look at why it didn't work, but I want to look at maybe try and get in the mind of Guardiola what he was thinking. I think he was trying to get Bernardo Silva in behind this Spurs double pivot. So I think the idea was to get Haaland and Alvarez on the last line, pushing the Spurs centre-backs back. The idea then was that Rodri and Lewis would match up with Bentancur and Højbjerg, and that Bernardo Silva would get this bit of space in behind, with Walker stepping forward this side near Son, and Ake stepping forward this side with Kulusevski near him. I think the plan was, from City's point of view, as it nearly always is, to try and overload the middle of the pitch, with Bernardo Silva getting in this 10 position. And we did kind of see that happening in the first 10 minutes or so, but Spurs were very, very proactive and quickly made a change to stop this. And it was actually quite clever how they done it. And initially what they done was they moved Højbjerg a little bit deeper, they moved Bentancur a little bit higher, and they dropped Harry Kane a little bit deeper. And basically created a new midfield three. So Akanji now for City has plenty of time on the ball, but he's got this time on the ball, he's looking ahead, looking in front of him, what can he see? Pretty much no free Manchester City players, because Rico Lewis is now being marked by Harry Kane, Rodri is being marked by Bentancur, and Højbjerg is now tightly marking Bernardo Silva. And I have to say, in this shape, Spurs were absolutely brilliant. Højbjerg in particular deserves a lot of credit. If we look at some of his stats from the game, we can see him winning ground duels, aerial duels, committing little fouls here and there to break up the City play, but then those clearances, the blocked shots, the interceptions, the tackles, he was absolutely everywhere on the pitch. He really did have a great game, and in general, Spurs' defensive shape was really good. Kind of as the game progressed a little bit, Spurs did then change shape again. Kane then went into a bit more of a natural striker position because they didn't want to be stuck too deep with Harry Kane dropping into midfield. That could have left them with no out ball. So Kane then moved back further forward. Bentancur moved into a bit more of a normal position. And what we now saw was a focus on Eric Dyer. Eric Dyer being a little bit more aggressive and kind of just keeping an eye on Bernardo Silva. He was always within an arm's length of Bernardo Silva when he's dropping into these areas. So whereas perhaps Bernardo Silva could get into these areas, get the ball on the turn, which I think was Guardiola's plan, now Eric Dyer was there, tight, forcing him backwards, and basically they're now man for man at the back. We've got Romero on Haaland, which was a good battle. We've got Davies on Alvarez, which Davies actually won that battle quite comfortably. City, if you look at it, they just had no way of getting the ball forward. Now, typically, what City might then do is step forward with someone like Walker, but this was the trigger for Son to then come across and press the ball, or City might try and build down this side with Nathan Ake, he might step forward, but again, Kulusevski would then come out, and that is the trigger for Spurs to then jump out of their mid-block. So initially, they're in a mid-block, but the ball goes into these wide areas where they then step with the ball. Spurs use this as their trigger to jump out of their press, and to go hard into Manchester City, and basically force them to turn around and go backwards. Of course, City are always happy to do that, they don't mind recycling possession, but as they then go backwards towards Ederson, this is where Spurs then put the high press on. And this is where they're now man for man in these areas. We see the likes of Bentancur on Rodri, Højbjerg pushing up on Rico Lewis, which we saw for the goal, of course, Kulusevski on Ake, and genuinely, it was just really easy for Spurs. Now, typically, I would try and show you different things tactically that were going on in the game, how different managers adapted. Typically, you'd now like to see, well, because of this, Guardiola then done this. It just didn't really happen. Spurs were good in their defensive shape, don't get me wrong. They were good in the way that they jumped out and got aggressive into the Manchester City tackles. They went man for man in these areas, forced them to play backwards. But this wasn't actually great from Spurs, but it didn't have to be. Spurs were good, don't get me wrong, and the way they took their goal was very good, and they looked dangerous all day on the counter-attack, which I'll come on to shortly. But it didn't have to be great. It was just bad for Manchester City. Really, really bad. Structurally, I thought it was wrong from Pep Guardiola, but also in terms of performance of the players. There's just no bite to them, there's no intensity to the way that they play, there's no crispness in the way that they pass. I think they have an issue with Rico Lewis in midfield as well. I think Rico Lewis is very good, but the problem is, what we've seen from Manchester City and also Arsenal now with Zinchenko is, of course, this evolution of inverted fullbacks. A role in football which I think is really important and I really like it. But there is a difference between a fullback which inverts and a fullback which just constantly plays midfield. Pep Guardiola at the moment has got Rico Lewis constantly playing in the midfield. This makes it too predictable. Cancelo, when he played this role before, would sometimes be wide, sometimes come inside. If you watch Zinchenko for Arsenal, yes, he spends a lot of time in this area, but there's also times when he's out wide as well, because that drags the opposition about a bit. With Rico Lewis constantly playing midfield, it made it very easy for Spurs to, once they'd forced them back, to go man for man, and City just couldn't really deal with that. They couldn't deal with it. Another issue that I have with this City team is the refusal to be a bit more direct. Haaland is brilliant at making runs in behind. Julian Alvarez is quite direct as well. Get the ball into them. Now, again, I think it does come down to the manager. He wants that control on the ball. He wants safety first football, control and possession. If they've got the ball, they can't concede. But it's too safe. They've got to look for these runs from Erling Haaland. They've got to play players like Aymeric Laporte in defence. He's one of the best ball-playing defenders in the world. And you know you're going to play a game where you've got a lot of possession, yet you don't play him. It's weird, right? This is a video on how Spurs won, but I'm talking mainly about Manchester City, so sorry Spurs fans, but I will come on to it in a second. But there is something really wrong with Manchester City at the moment. It just doesn't work. The only real hope they had in this game was the occasions when Haaland dropped a little bit deeper and was able to hold off Romero, who of course eventually got sent off, but more importantly was then able to get the ball wide to Grealish. I thought the battle between Grealish and Emerson was really entertaining. I thought Emerson probably just edged it because of course they didn't concede, but Grealish was by far Manchester City's best player. Not even close. He looked like the one player, and I don't want to throw this at these Manchester City players, but he looked like the one player that actually wanted to make a difference. We can see him getting plenty of touches on the ball, plenty of passes, but those dribbles, the ground duels, 13 out of 21, which ground duels we've got to remember is both in and out of possession, which shows how much he was getting into these duels, which is brilliant to see. Fouled 7 times, so he's winning Manchester City good free kicks. But he looked like the only one which really wanted to do anything. This is a really weird video to do. I'd love to sit here and tell you that Spurs put on this particular masterclass. Guardiola was trying different things, but Spurs kept adapting and defending well. We can't really do that because City were just so bad. And Spurs, again, like I said, they were good. Defensively, very solid. They timed that pounce out of their mid-block very well. Like I said, when the ball goes backwards, Spurs were brilliant and then pouncing out. But they didn't have to be spectacular. And that's what's frustrating for me. This should be a really good game of football between two of the biggest teams in England, two of the top teams. It wasn't. It just wasn't. And the quality, all the quality came from Spurs. All of it. Apart from Jack Grealish on the left for Manchester City, Spurs were the team looking good. And when they were winning the ball in these areas, they were doing something which we know they always love to do to Manchester City, counter-attacking. To be fair, Kyle Walker on Heung-min Son was smart from Pep Guardiola. It kind of nullified Son a little bit. However, down the other side, there was a problem, because with Rico Lewis coming inside, Kulusevski, who is a brilliant ball carrier, was getting into these areas time and time again. Again, Grealish was the main player getting back into these areas and winning the ball back, but when he couldn't do it, Kulusevski was getting at Ake time and time again. Rico Lewis couldn't get back out into these areas because he's playing too narrow, and we just know what Spurs love to do to Manchester City. Every time Kane's dropping into these areas, really bullied Lewis and Rodri, I thought. I don't think they were anywhere near good enough out of possession, and it allowed him to get into these areas. Turn, Højbjerg would then make runs forward in support, as would Bentancur. Son, Kulusevski, the wing-backs when they could as well. Really good counter-attacking performance from Spurs. They sat in their mid-block, pounced when they could, forced Manchester City backwards at times, won the ball back, and then looked dangerous in transition. But for Manchester City, there's problems. There's real problems. Their defensive shape is awful. One of the things that they've been really good at in recent seasons is that when they lose possession, their rest defence is so good that they quickly win the ball back. But they have a problem at the moment, because Rico Lewis is playing so narrow, but he's actually a fullback. But because he's constantly playing in this area, they lose possession, and he gets caught in between, should I go and press the ball as a midfielder, or should I retreat as a fullback? And when you've got that uncertainty in a counter press, it's a problem. Rodri just isn't breaking up play anywhere near as well as what someone like Fernandinho has in the past. There's issues for Pep Guardiola to try and solve. Now, realistically, he probably will. He's one of the best managers to ever grace the game, so he'll probably find a solution. But something just isn't right at the moment. Spurs fans, I'm a little bit sorry, because you won, you feel like you should deserve almost a bit more screen time, a bit more talking about you. But you didn't have to be great. Spurs, and again, this was frustrating for me, Spurs weren't brilliant. Spurs were good, very good in their defensive shape, but they weren't brilliant. It weren't a masterclass. It was a solid defensive display, but they weren't really tested. We didn't see any last-ditch defending from Spurs. We didn't see Manchester City bringing Haaland into the game. We didn't even see De Bruyne at all, really, in the game. He didn't get brought on until very late. Too late to really make an impact. It's not good enough for Manchester City. Something needs to change. If you would like a full tactical breakdown on City in a different video, looking at some of their problems, then let me know in the comments down below. As for Spurs, they impressed in this game. In their defensive shape, in this 5-4-1, it was very good. The way that Romero was aggressive on Haaland, Dyer on Bernardo, Davies on Alvarez, Perisic on Mahrez, Emerson on Grealish was a bit closer, but everywhere else, Spurs won all of the individual duels. This was man for man in a lot of areas. Spurs were the better team man for man, which meant that they won the match, and really there can be no complaints at all. City weren't good enough, Spurs were the better team, they deserved their win. That's all I've really got to say for today's video. There isn't much more to talk about other than that, but let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. What is going wrong at Manchester City? How good were Spurs? How good did they need to be? What did you make of the defensive shape? Was it a second yellow card for Christian Romero? All of that, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you have enjoyed the video. And as always, I will see you in the next one.